Okay friends, so here is my little treasure trove, my stash of eyeshadow palettes. I think I'm going to show you guys high-end palettes first, then drugstore, and then indie. So that way, if you're only interested in one category, you can go to that portion of the video. So I'll go through each palette, show you the color story, give you my impressions if I've used it before, and also give you some swatches. So let me just clear off this area and we'll get started. These are all of my high-end eyeshadow palettes. I actually think this is the category where I have the least amount of palettes. I even think I have more affordable and indie palettes than high-end, which is interesting now that I'm looking at it. Let's start with Anastasia because I feel like that's just like a cult classic. Alright, starting off strong, this is the Nouveau palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills. This was actually the first palette that I ever purchased from Anastasia, which is crazy. I know everyone has tried Soft Glam or Modern Renaissance, but I just wasn't really into makeup at the time when those were super popular. I think this launched maybe a year or two ago, and I decided to give it a shot because I love the color story, and I had never tried Anastasia before. So here's the color story. If this doesn't scream spring, I don't know what does. I love the mix of cool and warmer tone greens in here, and I just think it's a really fun and unexpected twist on a somewhat neutral palette. I love this pop of lavender right here. I've worn this all over the lid and just popped on some mascara for a simple everyday look, and I feel like it just looks really fresh and pretty. This shade right here, Lily, is my favorite in the palette. It's like a rosy neutral with lots of golden reflex scattered throughout it. It just looks so gorgeous on the lids. It doesn't look as rosy on camera for some reason. It's pulling a little bit more golden, but I think you can see the base pigment there a little bit. It definitely has a little bit of rosiness to it, so it goes really well with this Fleur shade and also Metro. Such a cool combination of colors that you wouldn't really think go together on first glance, but they totally do. I also really love this shade Isle. It's just a really pretty gold, but it's not too deep. So if you have a lighter complexion, this works really well. And even if you have a deeper complexion, this will look gorgeous. But I just find that sometimes golds pull a little bit deeper on my skin. They always look more like smoky than I want. This one is very bright still, and it has more of a yellowy undertone, which I just think pairs really nice with both the rosy tones in the palette and with the greens. Such an amazing formula. The mattes are so blendable. I was so impressed when I first picked this up. It's literally one of my favorite palettes in my collection. The other Anastasia palette I have is the Rose Metal palettes. So I think this launched maybe a year or so after the Nouveau, and I actually picked it up in the fall of 2023 when Ulta was having like a 50% off deal on this palette, so I got it for 50% off. I saw it and I was so impressed by the first palette from Anastasia that I knew I wanted to try this one because the formula was so impressive. This one is definitely more deep and smoky than the Nouveau. It's not a springtime palette really, it's more of a fall sultry smoky palette. This one is interesting as well. It does, like the Nouveau, have a mix of warmer and cooler tones. All of these shades kind of have a, I don't know how to describe it, like almost a gray smokiness to them. They're not super vibrant. They're almost desaturated colors. The mattes are the same great formula. They're very pigmented, very blendable, a little bit powdery, but nothing that tapping off your brush can't fix. I've only dipped into this palette a couple times just because it is more of that intense, dramatic sort of a color story. So it's not something I reach for on an everyday basis, but if these colors speak to you, then I don't think you'd be disappointed in the formula because it's really good. You can't have an eyeshadow palette collection without having at least one naked palette. It's just a given, you have to have at least one. And actually the Urban Decay Naked 3, I think it was, like the more rosy pink tone one, that was the first eyeshadow palette that I ever purchased when I was in college. And I didn't even know anything really about makeup or Urban Decay or anything at the time. I just remember going into Ulta and seeing those pinky tones and just being sucked in like a moth to a flame. So I picked that up and I had it forever, but I recently decluttered it because it was just so old and pretty gross. Some part of me wishes that I kept it just for like memories, I guess, but I did end up getting rid of it. However, I do have the Urban Decay Honey palette. This palette is a yellowy warm tone lover's dream. I love Urban Decay's matte formula. I feel like they do mattes really well. just really creamy, very pigmented. They have a more velvety, soft feel. They're just really a pleasure to work with and to apply. I will say the shimmers from Urban Decay are nothing to write home about, especially. They're just good, standard shimmer shades, nothing too intricate or unique about them. I do like this color story, but I gotta be honest, I feel like this could have been condensed down a bit. Some of these shades, like these two, while the depth is slightly different, like this one's slightly deeper than this one, they look really similar on the eyes. Same with these two. One's a little bit more cool, one's a little bit more warm. But overall, they are very, very similar. Same thing goes with some of these golden shades. This one has more of a yellowy greenish undertone, which is more unique. But again, some of them just wind up looking really, really similar on the eyes. So I feel like this palette could have been condensed down a bit. That's just me being nitpicky. I think overall it's a nice palette. The newest addition to my collection is this honeysuckle palette from Tarte. My sister actually bought me the holiday set for Christmas. It comes with this eyeshadow palette, the lip liner, and the Maracuja Juicy Lip in the shade Honeysuckle, which I have been wearing like crazy because I just love the tone of it. I love the formula. It's such a good lip duo. So if you like this eyeshadow palette, I mean, it's totally worth picking up the whole set because the lip products are really, really good too. I honestly have not even gotten a chance to try this palette yet, but the color story is gorgeous. I love that it comes with this mauvey, purpley, deeper blush right here that you can pair with the eyeshadows. As I was swatching this, I noticed that the mattes felt really nice, really pigmented. Again, the shimmers are nothing to write home about, but they didn't feel dry or chalky at all. So I'm excited to dip into this because I feel like the color story is just really approachable, but also a little bit different with these warmer, rosier tones. So excited to try this out. So this is the moment when the angel music starts to play. Because yes, I do have one lone Pat McGrath Mothership palette. This is the box that it came in actually, and I kept it because I mean, like, how can you not? The artwork on this box is so stunning. This is the Mothership 9. I think I'm a little rusty on my Roman numerals, but I think that's 9. The Huetopian Dreams. This is the palette itself. It's really nice and sturdy. The signature black packaging that Pat McGrath has with her logo. I actually still have this protective cover on it because again, this palette was expensive. It was like $100 and something. I did get it on sale like during one of her Black Friday sales for 30% off or so. But still, it's kind of hard to show you since the back is reflective. I just turned the brightness down a little bit so you can hopefully see the colors a little bit better, but I will be inserting swatches as well. So hopefully you'll be able to really see the color story. The most interesting shade in this entire palette is this one right here. I think this is one of her Blitz Astral shades. It's like an ultraviolet sparkly topper that just looks so magical on the eyes. If you layer this over any of the shimmers, any of the mattes, it's gonna just amp up the look to the next level. Bump, bump, bump it up. Kind of has a hot pink ultraviolet shift. It's super unique, super pretty. I also really like this shade right here. I think this is another Blitz Astral. Just those really fine, not glittery, but like almost glittery, sparkly shades. Pat McGrath's mattes are very pigmented, very blendable. It's a really great formula, and I do like this palette. I don't know if I would splurge on any of her other Mothership palettes just because I feel like you can find similar things from indie brands. The mattes are good, but they're not significantly better than Anastasia or other high-end brands or even indie brands. And the only thing that makes her palettes super, super, super unique are these Blitz Astral shades. But again, I feel like you can find them in a lot of indie palettes. So while I like this palette, I don't know if I would recommend it necessarily, especially not at full price. And I don't know if I'll be picking up any more Mothership palettes, but I am happy that I have it. I feel like it's just one of those like special makeup collector's items that makeup enthusiasts just want to have, at least me. Pat McGrath Mothership palettes are just iconic, so I'm happy that I at least have one of them. Very blessed. I do have one other Pat McGrath eyeshadow palette. It's not the Mothership, obviously it's way smaller. This was, I feel like it was a limited edition collection that she launched during the holidays. My mom got it for me for Christmas, along with the face trio that was in this like bijoux brilliance collection, and I mean, The packaging is definitely giving bougie. It's definitely giving nobility, Queen Elizabeth Castle kind of vibes, Downton Abbey. Super pretty. It's called Sunset Romance. I think she had 3 color stories. This is the more rosy toned version of the 3. These are beautiful. Again, the mattes are super creamy, super pigmented. I do wish there was one deeper matte in here just because, I mean, I guess it's pretty deep, but I don't know. I just would wish it was just a hint, just a hair deeper. And maybe one more like lighter matte instead of this shimmer, because this shimmer is actually my least favorite out of the 3. These 2 are super creamy, but this one is actually a little bit harder to pick up and it's a little bit more crumbly. It's not the same formula as these 2, so I just wish this was like a lighter matte or even like a black or something. But overall, it's a really cute little 5-pan eyeshadow palette, and if you wanted to try Pat McGrath, I think this is a good way to test out her formula, see if you like it. Of course, you don't get the Blitz Astral shades in here, but at least you can see if you like her mattes and shimmers before splurging on the Big Daddy. Super, super thankful that my mom got this for me. Another little cute 5-pan that I have is from Dose of Colors. This is the Pretty Cool palette, and let me just say, this is the most boring looking palette probably in my entire collection, but it's one of my favorite palettes because this is just every cool tone neutral that you would probably need other than a black. It's nothing too gray. A lot of cool tone palettes lean very, very, very gray, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I like that these are more everyday appropriate cool tones. This one I am obsessed with just smudging all over my lid and lower lash line because it gives me a little bit of color, a little bit of definition. It's not too deep and it's not too gray. It still looks really natural on my lids, at least on my skin tone, so I just love it for like a barely there contoured eye look. Dose of Colors mattes are amazing, so underrated, very pigmented, very smooth. I love their formula. Honestly, I feel like more people should be talking about them, and I'm really intrigued and I want to try like the warmer tone version of this, the berry tone version. I just love this little 5-pan so much that it makes me want to try their other color stories because, again, the formula is amazing, and I like that these are all like the same sort of a tone, but all of the undertones are slightly different. The depth is slightly different, and I don't know, it just gives you a lot of variety in such a small little curated palette. So definitely, definitely recommend Dose of Colors, and especially this little Pretty Cool palette that they have. There's something about being near this palette that just makes me feel so bougie. So like extra. If I were to pull this palette out of my makeup bag, I feel like people would just look at me and be like, oh, she's that girl. She is that girl, because look at this. This palette just radiates sophistication, beauty, glamour, all the things. This is the Patrick Ta Major Dimension Volume 3 matte palette. I purchased this with a gift card that I got for Sephora for my 30th birthday. And you know, since I was turning 30, I had to treat myself because, you know, it's a big thing. I was leaving my 20s forever. I was a little bit sad about it, to be honest. So I had to spoil myself a little bit. And honestly, I don't know if I would have ever purchased this if I hadn't had a gift card, because this thing is $70, 70 big ones. This is just pretty much every matte that you would ever need. You have the row of warmer tones, the row of cooler tones. Then you also get these cool little cream shades on the side. I was skeptical about this palette, but I will say the formula is top notch. Everything that you'd expect from a $70 palette. I mean, it better be for $70. Very pigmented, very, very blendable. Like, you can't really mess up with these shades, even though they are super pigmented. This black is like intense. You can use this as a smoky liner. One of the best blacks I have in my collection, probably the best black I have in my collection. And this white, I know it's like the most unassuming shade, like a white. That doesn't seem very special. It's not very unique. It's just a white. But I will say that whites are very, very hard to get right in eyeshadow. I find a lot of times they're very sheer, they're not opaque, they don't build up. This is a very, very good white, like very pigmented, very brightening, very opaque, super impressive. I love using this as an inner corner highlight. this one too if I want something a little bit more natural. It's gorgeous. Honestly, the bottom row is my favorite just because I like these more cool tones. This one's like the perfect crease color for my complexion, and again, I love the black, I love the white. It's an amazing palette. It's expensive. She's expensive, but she's gorgeous. Next up, we have Natasha Denona Retro Glam. This is the only Natasha Denona eyeshadow palette I have. I do have one of her face palettes. I didn't include that in this video. Just maybe I'll do a separate video with like face palettes and stuff. It does have some eyeshadows in it, but this is the only pure eyeshadow palette that I have from Natasha Denona. I picked it up because greens are one of my favorite colors to play with on my eyes, and I like that it wasn't the normal like mustardy, grungy green that you see in a lot of eyeshadows. This is more of a cool tone palette, which I felt like was super unique and added something different to my collection. I also like green and pink paired together. I just feel like it's such an unexpected color combo that you don't see often, which actually, now that I'm thinking about it, one of my other favorite palettes, the Nouveau palette, is green and pink. See, it is. It's such a good color story that you don't see too often, but when you do see it, it's really, really good. It's really pretty and very pleasing to the eyes. This is a nice palette. The only thing I will say is that I just wish it had a little bit more depth. It leans very, very light, which for an everyday look is not bad. But I'm just someone who likes to add some depth and drama to my looks when I'm playing. So I just wish that one of these deeper shades was a matte, because these are both satin finishes, so it's not ideal for adding depth to the look. Actually, again, the most boring shade in the palette, Lucy and Faye. These are my two favorite shades in the palette because they're these like khaki, brownish green colors. They complement my skin tone because I do have more of an olivey undertone. So these are just perfect for my crease, for all over the lid. Honestly, I really like this palette. I just don't find myself reaching for it as much as I thought I would. It's just missing, again, I think it's just missing that depth for me. I don't know. I do want to play with it more, and I am definitely going to be keeping it for a long time because it's my only Natasha Denona, and I think the formula is really good, but maybe a different color story would just work better for me. I don't know. Have any of you guys tried this? Do you have a favorite Natasha Denona eyeshadow palette that you would recommend? Let me know in the comments. Last but not least, for high-end eyeshadow palettes, we have this big Mama Jamma, Papa Jamma, Big Daddy, the ABH Norvina collection. I don't even know if these are still available. I think they are. I found this at my local Marshall's actually for maybe half price. And when I saw it at Marshall's, I had never seen ABH at Marshall's. Well, I know they have ABH there, but I never have seen their eyeshadows there before. And I feel like when I picked this up, there was also a Pat McGrath palette there, but it was a color story that didn't speak to me. So I don't know. It was just a time when Marshall's was popping in the makeup department. So I picked this up because I wanted to try one of these larger palettes from Anastasia Beverly Hills, and I really like this palette. I've played with it a lot. It's definitely more colorful, so if you don't like color at all, you're not going to like this palette. But if you like color, this is such a fun color story because you have the neutrals that can ground your look. You can take the look in a very everyday appropriate direction with this palette. If you just pop one of these browns in the crease, maybe deepen up with the plummy shade and use one of the more neutrally golden champagnes all over the lid. But obviously you can go very colorful. I love the greens in this palette. This lime green is stunning. This bright orange is so fun, and I like the play between the warm and cool tones in this palette. You've got a couple greens that lean a little bit more warm. You've got a couple greens that lean a little bit more cool. So it's just really fun to mix and match, and I feel like this color story just gets my creative gears turning, so I really like it. Again, I don't know if I would pick it up full price because I don't feel like the formula is as good as the rectangular Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes. These mattes are a little bit less powdery. They're a little bit more firmly pressed, which is not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but they're just not as pigmented, not as creamy. They're a little bit more thin, still pigmented, but just different. And personally, I prefer the other formula, but this one is still really, really good, and you get a lot of shades. So I do like it. I don't like it as much as the traditional Anastasia palettes / formula, but I think it's just a really fun color story, and I like the variety that you get in it. My kitty cat came to join me, so if you see her in the frame, she's just chilling, and I don't have the heart to move her. She looks so comfy. Okay, let's move on to my affordable palettes. Honestly, I have too many to fit in the frame, so I just want to start off with, I feel like, one of the best brands for affordable eyeshadow, which, say it with me, we all know what it's going to be, Colourpop. I've got maybe not as many as you would think, but still quite a bit. Let's start off with my most recent addition, the Lost in Love. This is their palette that they released for Valentine's Day this year. When I saw this color story being teased on Trendmood, I knew I wanted to pick it up because I love the mix of reds and oranges with pinks and purples. So yummy to me. And like I mentioned in the video where I did 2 looks with this palette, orange and purple were actually my wedding colors. So there's a soft spot in my heart for oranges and purples together, and I also just love reds and pinks. I do wish there was some more like true pinks in this palette. This is a pink, but it leans a little bit purpley. It's a little bit deeper. I wish there was maybe like a pop of a pastel or baby pink, something a little bit brighter. I wish there was maybe one more deepening shade. All of these mattes right here are pretty mid-tone. They don't go super deep, and I like to add a little bit of depth, so I feel like even just deepening up this purple a little bit would have made this palette more versatile. But I love these 2 shimmers in the palette. These are semi-glittery shades. They remind me a little bit of something you'd find in an indie palette, along the same lines as Pat McGrath's Blitz Astral. Just that like very fine glitter that looks almost like diamonds on the lid. These 2 are very beautiful. The other ones are kind of like, they're okay. But these 2 are definitely the star of the show. It's definitely a cute palette. I am really glad I have it. I think the packaging is adorable. The oldest palette in my collection is this right here. I will never get rid of this palette because it kind of marks the beginning of my love and my obsession with makeup. My little sister actually bought me this for Christmas. Gosh, it's gotta be like 10 years now. It's been a long time. And I had never even heard of Colourpop before this, and I never even heard of Kathleen Lights. So I didn't even mention what the palette is. It's the Dream Street palette from Colourpop times Kathleen Lights. I think this is their first collab they did together. And when I opened this palette, not knowing anything about Kathleen Lights, not knowing anything about Colourpop, I was shocked by how beautiful this color story was, how unique it was. I had never really seen colors like this in a palette before. Again, the only palette I had owned before this was the Urban Decay Naked 3, which was very rosy and neutral. And this is very warm and blue, totally the opposite. And I had a lot of fun playing with this palette. It has so many memories for me. Kathleen Lights was one of the first YouTubers that I really got into watching. So I love this palette and I will always keep it. I don't use it on my eyes anymore just because it's so old, but I'll keep it for the memories. I also have the Colourpop collaboration they did with Star Wars / The Mandalorian. This is the Child palette. If you're really interested in the Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette color story, this is a really great alternative. You don't get the pinky tones in here, but the greens are very similar, kind of those cooler tone neutrally greens. The shimmers are really pretty, and I actually like that this palette has a deeper shade than the Natasha Denona. I also like that you can go neutral with this palette too. You can use this in the crease, this all over the lid, this to deepen up if you want, or you can go full on green, or you can mix this more neutrally pink with the greens and it still looks really cool. Or you can even use the green in the crease and the gold on the lid. For such a small palette, it's a very versatile color story. So overall, I think this is a really fun spring palette and I reach for it a lot in the spring and summer. Next up, we have Colourpop That's Taupe. This is a cool tone lover's dream. If you like cool tones, but you don't want to break the bank, this one is really great. The shimmers are amazing. I love this shade right here called Slated. It's so sparkly and delicious. I also really like this deep shade called Constrictor. It's just really unique. It has almost a greenish undertone. I don't even know how to describe it. It's gray, but it has a hint of warmth in it that is just so unique. I definitely love this palette, but if I had to pick one neutral palette from Colourpop, it would be the Going Coconuts palette, just because this one is cool tone, but a little bit more neutral, not as grayish cool toned. So mine got destroyed because I dropped it tragically. So 2 of my shades were shattered, and I don't even know if these pigments are in the right slots, to be honest. This is my favorite shade in the palette. It's a brown with a hint of pink in it. You can't really tell on camera, but it's just so flattering. You can wear it with warm tone looks, cool tone looks. It's beautiful. Absolutely stunning. And I feel like the mattes in this palette are even more pigmented and blendable and creamy than in other ColourPop palettes. I don't know what they did with this formula, but this is one of the best formulations and the best color stories from ColourPop. So what I was saying earlier about ColourPop being the best affordable eyeshadow formula, now that I think about it, I might have been lying. Not intentionally, but I totally forgot about Moira. And Moira, if you want amazing, amazing pigmented mattes with really shimmery, impactful shimmers and cool color stories, Moira is where it's at. And I believe they're all under like that $20 price point. So I have two palettes from Moira. The first one is this Soul of Fire palette. And let me just say, I am not the biggest fan of this layout packaging situation. I feel like there's a lot of empty space in this palette. The background kind of throws off the color story. I mean, I get it. It's supposed to be a butterfly shape, I think. But I would have just preferred if maybe the palette was a little smaller and they were just in rows. I appreciate the thought of trying to do something different, but to me, it just seems like a lot of wasted space. That's just my opinion. Aside from that, like you can tell, my palette is dirty because she has seen a lot of love, and these shimmers, this gold, this green, they almost feel kind of wet. They're very emollient, super shimmery. I love this color story. It's so fun, so fun. This deep navy is spectacular. It's not patchy. It's so good, and this black is super intense as well. Can't say enough good things about it. The next palette I have is this Ace Spell on You. Honestly, this is not my favorite out of the two palettes I have. This one has more mattes. It's just the color story doesn't speak to me as much. These are more warm tones. It's just not my favorite. I feel like some of these mattes are a little bit too close for my preference. I would have preferred maybe to have a couple extra shimmer shades just to spice it up a little bit. But still, the formula is really good. But if I was going to recommend one, I would say out of these two, go with the Soul of Fire. Speaking of blues, Flower Beauty times ET. If you didn't know, Flower Beauty is Drew Barrymore's brand, and Drew Barrymore obviously was in ET when she was little. So this palette is sort of a nod to her beginnings, her childhood, her career as an actress. And this is supposed to look like a little DVD case. You got the scenes from the movie. The shadows are supposed to be like the disc. Are any of you guys young enough to where you don't even know? You guys know what DVDs are, right? Like when I was a kid, we still had VHS, and DVDs were the newfangled thing. But nowadays, it's like DVDs are old. But anyway, this color story is so beautiful. There's a really cool multi-chrome in here. It's a blue to lavender, almost with a little bit of silver in it, called Extraterrestrial. That shade is mouth-wateringly delicious. This shade right here, Do You Talk, it's a very sheer, taupery shade. It looks white, but it has a little bit of violet in it. It's so unique. I love it. And every time I'm feeling a blue look, I usually reach for this palette. I don't know if it's available anymore, but if you can still find it, I would definitely recommend. This palette looks disgusting, but it's only because it's so well loved. This is such a random palette in my collection. It's from Prism Makeup, I think. And I think it's called their Fantasy Eyeshadow Palette. I got this off of Amazon. Taylor Wynn here on YouTube was talking about it, I believe. And it's basically just a rainbow palette with a bunch of neutrals as well. It's almost every shade that you would need. And the pan sizes are smaller, but I think this palette was around $10 if I'm not mistaken. These mattes are amazing for $10. I'm shocked. They're so pigmented. I've done so many colorful looks with this palette. The shimmers are not super duper reflective or special, but they're still pretty. They're just more subtle. But I would say the mattes are really where this palette shines. If you're someone that really doesn't play with color that much, but you want to have some colorful options in your collection just in case you ever want to play with a little bit of color, I would really recommend this palette because, again, you have all the neutrals that you could wear on a daily basis, but then you have these fun pops that are really pigmented and really impactful, and you don't have to break the bank on shadows that maybe you're not going to be using as often. So I would definitely recommend checking it out. I believe you can still get it off of Amazon, and again, it's super affordable for how many shades that you get. I have two of the little bite-sized palettes from e.l.f. This one is Pumpkin Pie, which honestly I just bought because of the name, but I do really love these colors. They're perfect toasty orange, but not too bright. I love these mattes. They're really, really deep and smoky and really good quality for, what, a $3 or $4 eyeshadow palette. The shimmers are also really pretty as well. This is not a super bright color story, so it's definitely something a little bit more sultry and smoky, but it's really pretty. I love that it's more warm tone without being overly orange or red. And then my favorite is the Cookies and Cream, I think it's called. Cream and Sugar. I always think it's Cookies and Cream, but it's Cream and Sugar. This shade right here is so bright. If you like a really, really bright inner corner or a really, really bright lid shade, this one is very impactful. A lot of times affordable shadows, shimmers especially, can be more subtle. This one is very intense. And this deep brown is actually really pigmented as well. So if you are in a pinch and you really want some eyeshadows for under $5, e.l.f. bite-sized palettes are where it's at, and I really like these two that I have. They're also really nice for traveling because they're so tiny. I don't know, they're just so cute. Honestly though, if I had to pick between the e.l.f. bite size and these little quads from CoverGirl, these clean color quads, I would pick these. Even though they're more expensive, they're bigger, like you can see here. You get more product, the packaging's a bit sturdier, and I really like the color stories that CoverGirl offers more. They have more neutral options, if that makes sense. e.l.f. has some more colorful options, so if you want more affordable color shades, then maybe check out the e.l.f. bite size. But if you want something more neutral and just easy for every day, I feel like CoverGirl has really great color stories in these little quads, and I have the one in Golden Toffee. This shade all over the lid gives you the most bronzy, gorgeous, smoky, sultry eye look that makes it look like you tried way harder than you actually did. I loved wearing this shade all over my lid in the summertime when my skin was more tanned. I had some like red blush all across the cheeks to make me look like I was sun-kissed, and this all over the lid. It was chef's kiss, so gorgeous and just so easy. You don't have to think too much about this. This is probably the most affordable palette I have in my collection. It's from LA Colors, which is the sister brand to LA Girl. You can find this usually at Dollar General, or some Walmarts carry it. That's where I found mine. I think it's called their Alluring Beauty eyeshadow palette, and I have mine in Radiant Beauty. They might have other color stories, but this is the only one I have. If you are new to makeup, if you have a young daughter, teenagers, or you just literally don't really wear eyeshadow that much and you don't want to spend a lot on eyeshadow, this is a good one to check out if you see it at Walmart. I think they're around $3 or $4. And I will say I wasn't expecting much when I picked it up, but these mattes are really good. They're very pigmented. This cream color is really nice for all over the lid. This deep reddish color is great for like a smoky liner. The deep brown is actually really nice too for a smoky liner. I've used that quite a bit. Some of these shimmers are more toppery than full-on opaque shimmer shades, but I think they're really pretty for just tapped all over the lid on an everyday basis. Again, it's not gonna be Natasha Denona amazing quality, but for $3 or $4, it's a really great way to get started with eyeshadow, to practice with eyeshadow for beginners, for teenagers, or just for simple everyday looks where you don't really need anything super duper intricate or very pigmented. These are pigmented, but not too pigmented. So if you are beginning with makeup, sometimes it's better to go in with something that's buildable rather than super intense right out of the gate. So really love this little palette. It was a really nice surprise. I got this palette from my mother-in-law for Christmas. It was in my little stocking because she knows how much I love makeup. It's their Gilded Mini Eyeshadow Palette from Milani. This one is in Champagne Problems. Really pretty, neutral, leaning warm tone color story. The mattes in here are very pigmented, very blendable. The only thing I will say is that this tone right here it looks brighter in the pan than it does on the skin. For some reason, it almost like oxidizes on the skin. It's really weird. It looks a lot deeper once you apply it to the skin, which is not a problem. It's just if you have a very light skin tone like me, it's not ideal because I did want something to, you know, highlight the brow bone or the inner corner. So I wish this was maybe a little bit lighter, but you know, it could work for medium to deep skin tones, so I'm not too mad about it. It's just something to keep in mind that it's not true to pan. And I feel like these two shades actually look very similar as well on the lids. This one looks a lot lighter, but again, it almost deepens up on the skin, so it winds up looking more like this deeper red. A lot of the mattes look a little bit too similar, and I did find that the more you blend these, you have to be careful because you can kind of blend the pigment away. They're very pigmented, but if you go in to add more and you try to blend too much, it kind of dusts away what you put down, if that makes sense. So these are a good option from the drugstore, but not my favorite of all time. I would recommend definitely Moira or Colourpop or even those CoverGirl quads over these little Milani eyeshadows. A neutral palette that I would recommend, and that actually is 20 times better than that Milani palette, is from LA Girl. This is their Keep It Playful eyeshadow palette, and they have different color stories. So if you don't like this color story, they have more warm tone ones. I think they have a more pinky tone one. I love this color story though. It's in Downplay. Again, it's that neutral, leaning, cool tone color story, but it's not super gray. I mean, this is definitely more of a silver tone, but it's so perfect for like a New Year's Eve or a date night. It's so shiny and delicious. These mattes are creamy, pigmented. They feel like high-end shadows. This black, the Patre Taupe is more pigmented, but this is probably the second most pigmented black I have in my collection. It's such an amazing, underrated palette formula from the drugstore. I love, 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 love this little 9-pan. It's so good. It's just so good. Every time I use it, I'm amazed by the quality. Last but not least, when it comes to affordable eyeshadow, this is the Wet n Wild Always Naked palette. You get 16 shades in here, a mix of mattes and shimmers, one glitter, which I'm not the biggest fan of. It's really pretty if you like glitters, but this one is very piecey. I love this palette because you get a lot of versatility. Like, you get 16 shades, but it's such a small package, so it's really easy to travel with. It doesn't take up a lot of space, but you get a lot of options. You get cool tones, neutral tones, warm tones. Pretty much every tone that you would need for a neutral everyday look is in here. The mattes in here are so good. So, 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 so beautiful. This is my favorite shade in the palette. Again, just that easy, not too intense, very subtle, neutral, leaning, cool, that can contour the eye. You can put all over the lid if you're more fair to light like I am for an everyday look. If you like more peachy tones, they have that. Orangey yellow tones. The shimmers are really pretty as well. Again, they're more subtle, but for an everyday look, I don't mind them being more subtle, and I do like how they have different undertones. Definitely recommend this one as well. Honestly, I recommend most of the palettes in my collection. I usually will not keep palettes that I don't like, but some I like more than others, so I hope I'm not being too repetitive, trying to give you little mini reviews, but yeah, hopefully I'm not being too like, this is all great, like, because honestly, most of them are really great, but it just kind of depends on what color story you like. All right, last but not least, we have my indie palettes. Okay, so Nabla, I wasn't sure if I should count these as high-end because you can get them at Ulta, and can you get them at Sephora? I don't think Sephora carries them, but definitely at Ulta you can find Nabla. So it's not super like small like you would think of as an indie brand, but I think they are still an independently owned brand based out of Italy. So I'm placing them in the indie category, and this was the first indie brand that I ever tried. I have 3 eyeshadow palettes from Nabla. My favorite is the Midnight Cutie palette. I love blues. If you don't like blue, you're not gonna like this color story, obviously. But I will say that if you are interested in this color story and you don't want to spend the $26, I would go with the Flower Beauty ET palette that I mentioned earlier because there's a lot of similar colors. This shade is in the Flower Beauty palette, that thin white to violet duochrome taupery shade. It's the same. These blues, you got the mattes that were in the the palette, but I do really love this sapphire shade. It's so rich and saturated, such a yummy blue. And I also really think this shade, Quiet Storm, is so unique. It has more of a blackened base, but it has this really cool like purple, teal, blue shift that if you layer this on top of Blue Hour, how stunning would that be? This is kind of a random bronze. Honestly, I've never even used that shade. I've only used the blues, but I think it's a really good, cute little blue palette. If you don't really want a lot of blues in your collection, but you just want to have like one option, I think this or the ET palette would be what I recommend to start with. I also like how like tiny it is. It's good packaging. My second favorite Color Story palette from Nabla is the Side by Side palette. I know a lot of people really love this palette. This is a really nice neutral Color Story. Honestly, my favorite shade in this palette is this one down here called Love Ritual. It's a gray that has a hint of warmth to it, almost a little bit of purple in there. I don't have any other shades in my collection quite like that. I like this palette a lot. The mattes are very pigmented, very blendable. Some of the shimmers are more intense than others, but overall they're really, really nice. I like how you have lots of different undertones when it comes to the mattes. You have some more reddish browns, you've got some more cool tone browns, you got a more peachy tone brown. This bone color is really nice, and of course you have the gray and black. So you can go really cool tone, really rosy, really warm, really neutral. You've got a lot of options. I feel like I have this Color Story in my Wet n Wild Always Naked palette. So if you like this Color Story but you don't want to splurge on this, maybe check out the Wet n Wild one that I mentioned, because I feel like there's a lot of similarity. You don't get the cool tones in the Wet n Wild, but everything else I feel like you can find in that palette. But I think it's really pretty. I thought I was going to reach for this palette more than I have, but I don't think it's a bad palette. I don't know, it's just literally every time I reach for this palette, I always go for this shade. So in that way, I feel like it's kind of wasted. I wish that they could just have like a little quad with this bottom row, because that's really my favorite part. My least favorite Nabla palette is the Poison Garden. The packaging is really pretty. I like the mysterious dark roses. There's something sinister about it. I mean, obviously poison kind of gives like Snow White vibes or something, or Garden of Eden, but this palette was my favorite just because the mattes are really good, but some of the shimmers are very hard pressed. This orange is not very impactful at all. This brown is not very shimmery or shiny. It's kind of more of a satin. This is super pretty. It's again one of those more like white to violet taupe-y shades, but this one is very crumbly and hard to make smooth on the eye. I really like this blue. It's nice, but I wouldn't say pick up the palette just for the blue. I don't think the shimmers are very good in this one. So I was a little bit disappointed in it, but I don't want to get rid of it just because it was more pricey, and I don't think it's terrible. I can definitely make it work. I just wouldn't recommend purchasing it at full price. Honestly, I don't even know if this is still available. It would make sense if they did discontinue it, because I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect between this formula and the other palettes I've tried from them. I have two palettes from Odin's Eye, and Odin's Eye's packaging is probably my favorite. It's so beautiful. It just makes you feel good when you reach for it in your collection, which, you know, you want your makeup to work, but it also is nice when it can bring you a little bit of happiness, spark a little bit of joy. So the first one that I picked up from Odin's Eye was the Jewels and Gems palette. Jewels and Gem palette, excuse me. This is it's a cool tone palette that leans a little bit neutral, and I love how it's still sort of colorful but muted at the same time. It's a colorful color story that is still somehow wearable, if that makes sense. The shimmers in this palette are really something special. There's a lot of taupe-y shades in here, but they're not super crumbly, they're not dry, they look amazing on the eyelids. This shade, Rhapsody, is probably my favorite. It's like a cool tone, grayish, purpley shade. It's so unique. The mattes are very pigmented as well, very blendable, very buildable. I was so impressed when I first tried this palette because I didn't really know what to expect. It was my first time trying Odin's Eye, and they literally blend themselves. I love, love, love this palette. It's so unique. The formula is great. The packaging is great. I'm just so impressed by Odensai, and I really want to collect more palettes from them. This is the Sea Talk palette. They did this in collaboration with Lauren May Beauty here on YouTube, and I love Lauren. She's so funny and so pretty and so talented. And I had to pick this up because I love Lauren, but also, again, I love those more neutrally cool tones and blues. So this color story is like perfect for me because I love using this quad for more of a smoky, sultry look. These blues are amazing. I love this tealy seafoam green called Mermaid Scale. It is spectacular. And I also, my other favorite shade is Smoky Pearl. It's like a taupey brown. Ugh, my mouth is watering just thinking about it. Again, that same super pigmented, super blendable matte formula, and the shimmers are just something special. So love this palette. It's so, so, so gorgeous. So gorgeous. Like, you literally could frame this and put it on my wall and I would be happy. That's how pretty I think it is. This is one of my oldest indie palettes as well. This is the Fun Size palette from Sugar Pill. I love the little kitten, the little pixelated kitten. It's so adorable. I love the gaming theme. All the shade names in here have like gaming references, 8-bit, Twitch, Level Up, Rage Quit, Game Over, etc. I was a big gamer when I was younger. I loved The Sims. There was this game called Harvest Moon where you would like take care of farm animals, plant crops, all that stuff. I was obsessed with that game. I played it all the time. And even still now, I play games with my husband sometimes. We play a lot of League of Legends, Fortnite. So I have a soft spot in my heart for gaming themed things. But aside from the theming in the artwork, which I think is super cute, I love this color story. It's a rainbow palette, but it's not just primary colors. It's a rainbow palette with a twist. You got the reds, orange. This looks more olivey, but when you swatch it, it's almost like a pukey, yellowy color. You got the greens, which is a lime green instead of that like Kelly green. The blues, this is more of a periwinkle blue, more of a teal blue. You got a purple, which you can see I've dug into this. I actually scraped some out and mixed it with water to paint my face purple for a Halloween look one day. Which tip, you can totally do that with pigments. If you just scrape some out and mix it with water, it kind of creates like a watercolor that you can just paint on your face, and it dries down and just makes it look like you have blue skin or red skin or whatever. But every time I'm doing a colorful look, or most times when I'm doing a colorful look, I reach into this palette because it's just the perfect companion palette that you can use. You can do a one and done look, you can do a rainbow look, you can pair it with a shimmer. The quality is so good. It doesn't swatch the best. I was noticing as I swatched it that they look more sheer, but honestly on the eyes they apply really pigmented. So I definitely recommend this palette. Again, if you just want to have a small palette with some colorful options, I definitely recommend this one. It's still more on the affordable side. I think it was around $20 or so, but you get pretty much every color you would need. A lot of fun colors to play with, and yeah, the quality is just so good. I have one palette from Melt Cosmetics. This is their brunette palette. Probably the most neutral palette that Melt has. This palette looks boring, but it's so good. I love this cork shade. It's a neutral brown with a slight cool, almost green undertone, which again, you know, I love for an all over lid shade, just for subtle contouring for an everyday look. These deep browns build up really nicely. They're very intense. And I like Melt's formula because the mattes are very, very pigmented, so you can build them up quickly, but they blend out. They don't get stuck in one spot. The shimmers are good. They're not anything super, super special. Honestly, it's the mattes that I really love in this palette, and it's just a really easy, don't have to think too hard about it palette, and I love the undertones in this palette. There's something about the tones of this palette that keeps me coming back for more every time. I have one palette from Unearthly Cosmetics, previously known as Alien Cosmetics. This is their Strawberry Milkshake palette. I like the artwork on this one. There's something kind of like creepy about it, kind of fun and playful while also being semi-creepy, but not too creepy to where I'm like scared because I am a wimp and I don't like scary stuff. I actually kept the box that this came in because it almost has like that soft touch and it has a magnetic closure. It's just a really nice box, so I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it. But the palette itself has the same artwork, and I picked this up because because they actually had a big sale. This is a discontinued palette. I don't even know if they have any more in stock. So they had it for like 50% off, and I really wanted to try Unearthly's formula, and it is good. It's really, 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 really good. Very, very pigmented, high-end quality, on par with all the other high-end brands that I mentioned. The shimmers are so gorgeous, and even though they're intense, they look smooth on the eyelids, and this color story is just so fun. I mean, obviously they have the greens and the reds for the strawberry, but you have some unexpected pops. Like this lavender can pair really beautifully with the lime green. It can also pair really beautifully with the reds or the pinks. So it almost looks a little disjointed when you first look at it, but actually somehow all of these tones work really well together. Like this lime yellowy green, again, can pair with the greens. You can pair it with the reds and the pinks, and it doesn't look disjointed or out of place. So I really like that there's only 9 pans in here, but it's a super unique color story that gives you a lot of different options. You can go really light, you can go really deep, and you can go totally green, you can go totally reddish pink, you can do a mix and match, and it all just somehow works. So I'm really impressed and looking forward to trying out more things from Unearthly in the future. A palette that I'm not so sure about. This is from Blend Bunny Cosmetics. This is the Surge palette. I've heard really great things about Blend Bunny, and I was really excited to try this out because of this neon row down here. You can't really see it on camera, but in person, these shades are very, very neon, glow-in-the-dark neon status. I don't know if it's just me or how I'm applying it, but I never can get these neons to be smooth on the eyes. They're a little bit dry, and they always look a little bit patchy on me. I think the deepening shades are superb, really beautiful. The other mattes I love. The shimmers are okay, not where the palette shines, but the reason why I bought this palette was for these neons, and I just feel like they're a little bit hard to work with. Again, that could be user error, but for me, I was just a little bit disappointed in how difficult they were to work with. But I'm gonna keep playing with it. I've only used it a couple times. I think it's good, but again, I'm not quite sold on it yet. I have 2 palettes from Juvia's Place. I picked these up during the Black Friday sale they were having on their website. Juvia's Place has some crazy Black Friday sales, like 40% off, crazy stuff. So I would not ever recommend buying a Juvia's Place palette full price because they have so many sales. Haven't tried these yet. I'm waiting to try them in like a testing Juvia's Place eyeshadow video because I also have their foundation that I want to try out and these palettes. So I've tried a lip gloss from Juvia's Place, and I love their blushes and bronzer duos, so I am excited to try their eyeshadows because I've heard really great things. So I picked up the Nomad palette because these grungy greens were something that I felt like was missing in my collection. I don't think I have another palette that has this particular color story, but I love this particular color story. There's something about it that when I see a color story like this, it just looks delicious. And I do have a more olivey undertone, so I feel like this is gonna look really nice on my undertone. The pan sizes are actually pretty big, bigger than I was expecting, and honestly I haven't even swatched this yet, so I will insert swatches so you guys can see it, but I'm excited to see how this performs on the eyes because I have high hopes. The other palette that I picked up was the Blushed Rose palette. This is a 6-pan eyeshadow palette. I have swatched this one, and I will say that from swatching it, I am very impressed. The mattes are very pigmented. They seem really smooth and velvety, not dusty, not chalky, and the shimmers are really pretty. I also love how this peachy shade is thrown in here because I love peaches with pinks together. It's such a beautiful color combination. So it's a pink color story, but it has a little bit of versatility with the warmer pinks in this peachy tone. So I'm really excited to test this one out. I think it's so pretty. If you guys have watched any of my videos this past month in January, you will know how completely enamored I am with the Lands of Enchantment palette from Ensley Rain Cosmetics. This is the first palette I've ever tried from Ensley Rain. The packaging is gorgeous. It's giving Jana from League of Legends. If you know, you know. It's giving fairy princess, ethereal vibes. And I mean, the color story is spectacular. It's sugar plum fairy, ethereal, rainbow goddess dreams. I'm obsessed. I love how unique this color story is. This periwinkle, these mints, this lavender, this sky blue. All the mattes are so gorgeous, so pigmented and easy to build, especially even the pastels. They're very pigmented for pastels, but I would say where this palette shines is with the shimmers. There's some holographic shades in here. There's some more glittery shades in here. There's duochromes, breathtaking. Beautiful. It's such a unique, fun color story, and I definitely want to try more from Ensley Rain. Their palettes are definitely more on the pricey side. This one I believe was $88 or so, but you get a lot of shades in here, and the quality, honestly, if I had to pick between getting another Ensley Rain palette and a Pat McGrath palette, I would pick Ensley Rain because you get more than just one or two special shades. You get a lot, and I feel like the mattes are just as good, and the color stories are more fun. They're not all pink. You know what I mean? Okay, last but not least, this is not technically a palette, but I felt like I should just throw it in here. These are my single shadows from Sydney Grace. I don't even know if these have the names on them, to be honest. Let me see. So this one is Hot Stuff. Vanguard is this deep olivey green. Voila is this deep reddish brown. Matte. This is so hard to do with fake nails. Pismo? It's almost a cool tone, neutrally brown with a little bit of gray and purple undertones. This one is Iced Mocha, neutral brown with a little bit of a pink undertone. And then the other shimmer that I have is Wondrous Night. And I'll go ahead and swatch these for you guys so that you know what they look like rather than just in the pan. Sydney Grace has an amazing formula. The mattes are very velvety. I feel like a broken record, but honestly, they're really, really good. I would like to try one of her palettes, like a curated color story from her. Out of all the indie brands, I would say Sydney Grace has the most neutral tones offered. A lot of indie brands have more colorful color stories, rainbowy color stories, bright, fun, different. This is the more neutral lovers brand, if that makes sense, which is not a bad thing. I like neutrals too. So if you want to check out an indie brand, but you don't want something super bright and intense, I would recommend checking out Sydney Grace because a lot of her color stories are way more approachable, and you can just buy these singles like I did. I wanted to test out the formula before I committed to a whole palette because her palettes are more pricey, and just from testing out these, I can say that the formula is really, really good. The shimmers are very intense. They're not, at least these two that I have, they're not toppers. They're more of that opaque shimmer that just is gonna make your eyelid shine, but it's really smooth. Doesn't look crepey on the eyelid, doesn't look texture enhancing, and the mattes are very pigmented, very blendable. So if you like neutrals and you want to try an indie brand, definitely recommend Sydney Grace. I figured I would throw these in here in case you guys were interested. So yeah guys, that is my eyeshadow palette collection. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, found it helpful, found it calming, found it entertaining, found it informative, any of that stuff. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. It really means so much to me. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Bye.